Hey guys, what's going on? Rocket Cat here, and welcome to the ultimate guide of GDF vs Dynasty Harvesters. Or rather, we're just going to be looking at a lot of numbers today and trying to figure out which one of these harvest methods is better, if any. So we're going to be looking at a number of categories here, ranging from their income to their cost, their utility, defense, and of course their offense. So let's get started. So let's start with the GDF Harvester. The refinery costs $2,000 to create, and when you do create it, then you will get a free harvester out of the deal. You can also build harvesters out of the vehicle bay as soon as you build your vehicle bay, but we don't know what they cost yet. I think they're maybe around $1,000. And the way the harvester works is that this big hulking guy is going to go, and he's going to go to the Tempest field, and he is going to try to harvest 800 Tempest from the field. That is 800 Tempest, and once he has 800 Tempest, he will return to the refinery, and they will do this unloading animation, and they will drop it off. How this works instead in the Dynasty is that you have your mobile Tempest Rig, and you can move it around the map, you can pack it up, and wherever you place it, the Tempest miners will start mining. There are 4 Tempest miners attached to this rig, and they will go out and each of them will harvest 100 Tempest from a pod, and then they will return and deposit it. The trips are generally shorter, and there's more of them, but they hold 100 instead of 800. Another thing to note with these harvesters is that, or rather the rigs themselves, is that they are created from the first building that one of the first buildings that the Dynasty can produce, and that is the machine shop. So once you build your machine shop at the start of the game as Dynasty, you can build your power plants and you can build a machine shop, and you can start cranking out your Tempest Rig from your machine shop. So to build this thing, you don't need to use your production queue in the same way that you do with the GDF. Rather, it produces from a building, and I consider this to be a slight advantage. But we'll have to learn more about Tempest Dynasty building methods to say for sure. Brandon also happened to mention that these Tempest rigs cost 1,800 credits at the moment. So with 1,800 credits, that means that it is less expensive to build slightly than to build one of these rigs than it is to build a refinery and get a free harvester out of the deal as GDF. So the first thing I wanted to compare was the Tempest per minute that these two harvest methods bring in. Simply, which one harvests Tempest faster? And to answer this question, I looked at, well, how long does it take one harvester, one GDF harvester, to go mine 800 and then return and drop off? And then once the exit animation begins, where does it go? And same thing for the Tempest Rig. So to test this, I went through my footage and I counted the number of seconds it takes for a Tempest miner versus a GDF harvester to complete its full route. For Dynasty harvesters, they seem to take about 13 seconds, and for GDF harvesters, I pegged it at about 33 seconds. It was a little difficult to tell since the Tempest fields in the GDF mission are a little bit worse than the ones in the Dynasty mission, so I give them the benefit of the doubt, and I put it at 33 seconds. And from this, we are able to compute the theoretical Tempest per minute on one harvester versus on 4 Tempest miners on one rig. And for this, I computed it at about 1470-ish Tempest per minute on the GDF, and 1846 Tempest per minute on 4 of the Tempest miners to one rig. And this represents about a 25% increase in overall Tempest income that you get from the Dynasty rig. Now, of course, this isn't the full story, since you are, of course, able to put about 2 harvesters to 1 refinery as the GDF. So while Dynasty does seem to have an advantage right out of the gate, once they build their first thing, the GDF are able to come back eventually as you add more harvesters to your refineries. The next thing to consider when it comes to Tempest per second is pathing issues. And now, of course, we hope that harvester AI gets improved over time. But this is nevertheless a consideration when we think about Tempest per second. So for both GDF and Dynasty, there are moments where both harvest methods can run into some serious issues. For instance, in this clip, we have these Tempest miners struggling a little bit hard in order to get, like, it parks here, and instead of going straight left, they will try to all narrowly go through this little canyon, and we see Tempest miners doing laps around the Tempest miner, and they even go south up the road sometimes in order to go all the way through this field. So in this case, the income per minute, the Tempest income per minute is absolutely dreadful. So this is something to consider when we look at this, but let's look at the GDF Harvester. If we look at the GDF Harvester here, you'll see that when we place the refinery exactly here, it likes to do laps around the refinery before it actually makes it out to the Tempest field. And there it goes. It's going to go back, I guess, to that different pathfinding region before it decides which one it's going to harvest. So this is an issue right now with the GDF harvesters. And funnily enough, we can actually fix this by just moving the refinery over by one tile. So if we just move the refinery over one tile, then this will not occur at all. And another thing here with the Tempest rigs, it does have this B toggle auto harvester function. And in this, I wanted to test how this works. And I found that it could work if I harvested this field here. This field has no craters, so once it's mined out forever. And I wanted to see if maybe the auto harvester would move closer to the nodes as they got mined out, and it actually didn't do that at all. So you can actually build on these in these craterless Tempest fields. As soon as you mine it out, you can actually build on them. But this auto harvesting button toggle, it actually it won't move the rig closer to the nodes, and I'm not even sure if that would make the overall optimal harvesting better. Instead, what this does is it will actually move the rig. And so once I completely harvested this out, the Tempest rig, I ran out of disk space, unfortunately, so I can't time lapse it, but the rig will move from this field, and it will move down to a different location. And so where did it decide to go? Well, it decided to go here, of all places, and this is obviously not a great place for it to go. It's very jank. I wouldn't recommend using this auto harvester toggle at the moment, and even once it finished this, it had some further difficulties. So here it goes. It's trying to find a new spot, and it actually chooses the top of this cliff to deploy, and it becomes permanently stuck at this point. Well, not permanently. You can still pack it up and move it, but the auto harvester has completely failed at this point. So it's safe to say that in this discussion of GDF versus Dynasty, let's just not talk about this auto harvester button at all. So the last thing to talk about with respect to income. So we've looked at the AI, we've looked at the actual Tempest per minute rates. The last thing to talk about is field sustainability. And if you haven't watched my Tempest Mechanics Explained video, that would be good background for this particular discussion. But we're going to talk about field sustainability. That is, how good is the Tempest harvesting method at pruning the field such that it will promote Tempest growth in the field. And in my opinion, Tempest miners, the Dynasty Tempest miners, since there are 4 of them, and since they tend to touch more pods, this means that they're actually going to be resetting the growth timers in the Tempest field more often than the GDF harvesters will be. So GDF harvesters, they will, a lot of the time, they'll target only certain pods, whereas the Tempest miners, since they sort of go and they'll clear cut sort of, and they'll touch a lot of pods as they're doing so, that means that if a pod is about to grow, there's a stronger likelihood with the Dynasty method that those timers for them to regrow will get reset as soon as they're touched. So I would say that the GDF harvesters are a bit more sustainable, and you also have the fact that GDF harvesters can be manually controlled. You can tell GDF harvesters, specifically which node you want to harvest. So I think this is an advantage GDF in terms of sustainability and just manual control. So with GDF, because you can manually determine which one you want to go, you will be able to do sort of scorched earth tactics. If you want to make a Tempest field worse, you can target specific nodes in order to make a Tempest field bad if you're retreating from it. Or you might be able to harvest specific nodes if you're trying to prune it a little bit to make it a little more sustainable manually. That's something you can do. Or so I just feel like GDF has a slight advantage with respect to your overall manual control and field sustainability. Next, let's just talk about some utility aspects comparing the two. So obviously the huge advantage goes here to the Tempest Miner, the Tempest Rig, in that it can relocate. So because it can relocate, you can just move on to a different field, and you can also tap distant Tempest fields faster. Now, of course, the GDF is able to use Support Beacon to project their build tiles out further, so in the map fast. But in order to get that support power, you will probably need to spend intel, and in any case, it will probably require you have at least built a satellite uplink already, whereas Dynasty will be able to, as soon as they get that machine shop, start cranking out their Tempest rigs if that's what they want to do. So I suspect that the Tempest Dynasty is going to be more prone to a greedier openings if the GDF player, a GDF opponent, will be too passive against Dynasty, so you'll be able to tap more Tempest fields faster with this method. And then, of course, you can simply, if you're trying to retreat from a position, well, you can, of course, sell your refineries as GDF if you're trying to retreat from a position, but of course then you'll have to build it again once you want to come back, whereas Dynasty can just pack up and move, and once it's safe again, they can back up and move back in. So overall, definitely in terms of the general mobility and utility here, huge advantage Dynasty. So next thing I want to talk about is the overall defensiveness of the two methods. And the first thing to mention is, of course, that these Tempest Harvesters will respawn after 15 seconds. So once you kill them, they'll simply respawn. So while they are quite vulnerable to harassment, you do get them back for free. Compare that with the GDF Harvesters, where if they die, of course, they simply are dead forever. Because of this, I think the best way to compare the defensiveness of these two harvest methods is to look at the rig and the harvesters side by side. So to do that, let's pull up their health and armor spreads. So in this table, I've broken down effective hit points of each, the harvester and the Tempest Rig. And effective hit points basically means against this specific damage type, effectively how many hit points do I have? So while the GDF Harvester has 1300 hit points normally, against rifle type damage, for instance, since it has 75% armor, this means it essentially has a 75% larger health pool. So that's what these numbers mean. And if we go through the rows on this, we see that, well, rifle damage, against rifle damage, GDF Harvester is slightly worse. Against rocket damage, since the GDF Harvester has 25% armor here, which the Tempest Rig does not, they're actually about the same in terms of takiness. And when we look at explosive, there's actually a huge advantage here for the GDF Harvester. And conversely, with cannon damage, there's a fairly huge advantage for the Tempest Rig. And with respect to cannon damage in particular, we actually saw this in the multiplayer showcase, where I was a little surprised when I saw Fred's tanks laying into the Tempest Rig of Brandon. And I guess I just expected this to do a little bit more damage, but you can see here that Tempest Rigs actually have, since they have this 50% cannon armor, they do have a lot of hit points against this cannon type damage in particular. And we're not exactly sure yet how important cannon is going to be, but it is the damage type of the main battle tank of both factions that we know about so far. So it could be that this cannon vulnerability of the GDF Harvester is maybe the Achilles heel here, whereas this explosive and rocket vulnerability that we see with the Tempest Rig could be slightly relevant as well. I noticed in the mission when a couple grenadiers were attacking my Tempest Rig, it definitely felt pretty bad. Like it was going down pretty quickly, and the grenadiers are explosive type damage, so that's not too surprising. Fire, I'm not sure how relevant this is if we're going to be massing up enough fire type units for this vulnerability to be relevant. And sniper, I don't think this is super going to be relevant either. I can't imagine us building that many snipers, but I guess we'll have to find out. So overall, I think I would give a slight advantage here to the Tempest Rig in terms of tankiness, but that is given the fact that I expect there to be quite a lot of cannon going on, and that might not be the case. It may be that there is actually a lot of rocket and explosive flying around, and the Tempest Rigs are actually way more vulnerable than I expect. So a slight advantage possibly for the Tempest Rig, but that's not all there is to think about when it comes to defensiveness. So GDF Harvesters, of course, the moment you sniff any danger, you can just move them to safety. And while you might lose a refinery, you're not going to be losing your Harvesters themselves a lot of the time if you're careful. Compare that to the Tempest Rig, where since the Tempest miners function as the wheels of the rig, this means that if you do not have all of your Tempest miners, say an opponent comes in and it kills a Tempest miner, it actually takes 15 seconds per dead miner for that miner to respawn. And it respawns for free, which is great. However, this means that if an opponent comes in and kills all 4 miners, it's going to take a full minute for these harvesters to come back. And during this time, if you've queued up a dismantle order or whatever, your Tempest Rig cannot move. It can only move as soon as it has 4 guys attached to it. So this is something to keep in mind. This is a pretty crucial vulnerability, I would say, with the Tempest Rig. So long as it's deployed, if you just kill one of its wheels, well, then it can't move. Now, of course, so long as it's in refinery mode, you can use the remote repair ability, and this is kind of a nice offset, though you're going to have to decide as a Dynasty player if you want to try to keep something alive that's on the front line, you're losing it, maybe you want to spend some credits to use your remote repair tool in order to keep it alive while you wait for backup, or you might decide that it's better to just try to get out of dodge or even just sack the whole thing if it's doomed for sure. All in all, in terms of mobility, survivability, I'm going to give an advantage to the GDF Harvester here simply because you can just move the GDF Harvesters out of the way, and they are, by the way, also faster once they are on the move. So, slight advantage, GDF. Nevertheless, since you can use that remote repair on the rig itself, that's kind of a nice little benefit in that niche scenario. And there is also the fact, of course, that if you're going to be losing your harvesters and maybe you get your harvesters out of the way, well, that's not necessarily always going to help you keep your remote refineries alive. So you will probably be losing your refineries. There's nothing you can do about that if you can't defend it as GDF. Now it's time for everyone's favorite category, offense. So the Tempest Rig, by the way, is a heavy vehicle, and this means that it can crush other vehicles, including medium vehicles and light vehicles, and it can also crush heavy infantry. The only thing it cannot crush is heavy vehicles, other heavy vehicles. And among the other heavy vehicles is the GDF Harvester. The GDF Harvester is classified as a heavy vehicle, but it is not a true heavy vehicle. The GDF Harvester, it is classified as a heavy vehicle so that it cannot be crushed by anything. So heavy vehicles can never be crushed by anything, and the GDF Harvester is included in that. So however, the difference with the GDF Harvester is that it will not crush it will crush as if it's a medium vehicle. So it can crush light infantry, it cannot crush heavy infantry, and it cannot crush other vehicles, light or medium. So that's one exception here in the grand scheme of what crushes what. The GDF Harvester, while it is classified as a heavy, it cannot crush like a heavy vehicle can, like the Tempest Rig. So here we're speedrunning this Tempest Dynasty mission by simply just taking our Tempest Rig to the victory point. Nevertheless, I do think that this is not necessarily super huge a deal. I'm not exactly sure how important crushing is going to be, at least in a multiplayer context. Of course, when you're against if you're mainly interested in going against the AI is very defenseless. The troops do kind of push a little bit out of the way, but for the most part, they get steamrolled by crushing. Whereas in multiplayer, it's a little bit difficult because I feel like at lower skill levels, we will probably see more crushing, but at higher skill levels, we will probably see very little crushing at all. So it's a little bit difficult to rate the GDF Harvester with the Tempest Rig in terms of its offensive capability with its crush. Another thing to think about is that since the GDF Harvester is faster, I actually have more faith in the GDF Harvester to actually be crushing things, since you're going to need a very unattentive opponent or an AI opponent for it to really matter, since the Tempest Rig is just rolling up on you real slow. And if you have a really unattentive human opponent, then maybe you'll crush something, but I don't really see it working a lot of the time otherwise. Now, that might be different, that might change, but yeah, we'll have to see. And now it's time for the moment of truth, where I tell you exactly which one is better. Neither one is better. I gotta say, I actually think these are very finely balanced already. I think there's still some things to iron out, especially with the pathfinding and so on, to make a full conclusion. And we also don't have all of the factors in play yet, so we're gonna have to see how those Tempest fields look, and we're gonna have to get a general flow, especially in a multiplayer context, of general flow of multiplayer matches. But I don't think that either of these harvesting methods is necessarily better than one another. In each category, we sort of found ups and downs for each. So even with something as clear cut as 25% faster Tempest per second income from the Tempest Rig over the GDF Harvester, well, the calculus gets all kinds of screwed up as soon as you build your vehicle bay as GDF and you add another harvester to your refinery. And, you know, the amount that you've invested kind of gets thrown off, and it's ultimately a heavily asymmetrical design which promotes dynamic gameplay. And I'm really excited to see how this economic asymmetry plays out in real time. And that, my friends, has been Dynasty GDF Harvesters compared. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please leave a like, maybe even subscribe. That'd be pretty cool. Well, we'll see you